From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to Jim Crow, sadly. That's right, Jim Crow returns. That's the headline of a new report by investigative journalist Greg Palast on how new voter ID laws risk disenfranchising millions, especially Black, Latino, Asian-American voters. 27 states are now participating in the Interstate voter registration Crosscheck program. Backers of the program say it's needed to prevent voter fraud by highlighting the names of voters who may have voted in 2 or more states in the same election, but critics say it's being used to stop Democratic-leaning voters from going to the polls. Tens of thousands of names have already been removed and millions more are threatened. Greg Palast produced this piece for Jazeera America based on a 6-month investigation. It begins with Republican political operative Dick Morris speaking on Fox News about the 2014 midterm elections.
So you're talking about probably over 1 million people that voted twice in this election. The first concrete evidence we've ever had of massive voter fraud. We've talked about it ad nauseum. This proves it.
Greg Palast is a private investigator turned journalist who's been following voting rights in every election since 2000.
Yeah, I got into this stuff when Bush won by 527 votes. And now, it's a decade and a half later, and I'm hearing the cry of voter fraud. There's 1 million people committing voter fraud. Is there really this big crime wave?
The journey begins here in Kansas, where Republican Secretary of State Chris Kobach has launched a nationwide campaign against voter fraud.
Take double voting. That's a slam dunk to prove that. A guy's voted in Kansas and he's voted in Colorado. It's a state crime. It's also a federal crime, but the Obama administration is not interested in prosecuting. Surprise, surprise. And so we have to do it.
In 2011, he began promoting a digital name matching program used to scan electoral records and flag anyone whose name appears on the voter rolls in more than one state. It's called Crosscheck, and across the country, 27 states are using it to investigate possible voter fraud. Among them, 22 have an election board controlled by Republicans.
Otherwise, you've heard from me.
Palast and his team contacted every state involved with Crosscheck to request access to these so-called double voter lists. Only 3 complied, and now Al Jazeera is making them public for the first time.
It took us months of harassing these offices till they finally gave up the list from Washington and Virginia and Georgia. And I looked at these millions of names: Jorge Rodriguez, David Lee, Joe Black, common names. That's the only identifier. So then I say, well, who are these guys?
Palast went to North Carolina, where electoral officials have taken the unusual step of hiring a former FBI investigator. He's been given a list of more than 190,000 names flagged by Crosscheck to determine if any of them should be prosecuted for voter fraud.
Hey, how are you? Mr. Lawson. Good to see you. Okay. Welcome.
Josh Lawson is a spokesperson for the North Carolina Board of Elections.
Have you busted anyone because of Crosscheck?
We've not made any referrals yet to any district attorneys. There's not been a presentation to the state board.
Not even a referral?
Which is required under state law.
Have you bagged any double voters in, say, the last 10 years?
We've made referrals. Whether the DAs have prosecuted them, we do not have good data on.
And is it really difficult to find these people?
It's not about just going out and blanketly trying to arrest somebody. You have to have evidence of a crime.
Of the 3 million names identified by Crosscheck in the last 2 years, not one has been convicted of voter fraud. But Virginia, another state using Crosscheck, has already struck more than 41,000 voters off the rolls, admitting that some of them may have moved out of state. Other states like North Carolina have been reaching out to voters on the Crosscheck list by mail. Those who fail to confirm their identity will be denied the right to vote on Election Day.
But you had this whole hysteria over the fraudulent voters. But do they exist?
We know that
we have fraudulent
exist.
You know that.
But
you can't find them even though you have their address. You sure they aren't?
Again, is there a
phantoms?
question? I understand.
I'm asking why you can't find them if you have their addresses, social security numbers, signatures.
I never said we couldn't find them. I said that we had not prosecuted.
The problem is the methodology. there's over 1 million middle names that are mismatched. So look at this. You got, in Georgia, James Elmer Barnes Jr. is supposed to be the same guy as James Cross Barnes III. Then you go right down and you see James Ratcliffe Barnes Jr. is supposed to be the same as James Anthony Barnes, the nothing, probably senior.
In fact, Georgia's cross-check list has more than 500,000 names on it. Palast went there to find out how the state was handling them, and found out that few people even knew this was going on.
Here's the type of matching that they do. Vincent Hardy Williams voted in Georgia. Vincent H. Williams voted in Virginia.
Okay.
So they said that that's the same guy.
And how do they know that that's the same person?
Stacey Abrams is the top-ranking Democrat in Georgia's state assembly. Palast went to meet her 3 weeks before Election Day.
I sit as the minority leader of the House of Representatives. This information has never been presented to the House of Representatives. I think it's completely unreasonable, and I certainly intend, through my auspices as a member of the House of Representatives, to investigate and to request information from the Secretary of State about this program, about the nature of the program, about the origin of it, about the resources being used to implement it, and about whether or not we are systematically attempting to disenfranchise 500,000 of our Georgia voters.
Well, for someone to vote in 2 places, that's kind of odd, because we have a hard time getting them to vote 1 place.
Helen Butler is the director of the New Georgia Project, a Get Out the Vote initiative aimed at minorities.
According to voting protection groups that we've met with in Carolina, according to Dick Morris on Fox TV, that the Obama campaign, for example, may have had 1 million people voting twice, and that he stole the election.
Oh, that's crazy. That is totally crazy. There were not people voting twice in any election. And if they're basing it off of this, they are crazy as well, because that tells you that that is not good information.
In the lead up to midterms, Georgia has begun sending postcards to anyone suspected of being a double voter, asking them to verify their registration. But Butler says they're easy to miss.
So do you think if someone got this, that their vote would be saved?
No, because more than likely they're going to throw it out. And that's the way junk mail comes. And like me, I go, whoop, I don't know who that is. Whoop.
It's the first day of early voting in Georgia, and this polling station is buzzing. With a race for governor and an open Senate seat in the balance, these Georgians know every vote counts. But not everyone who wants to vote will be allowed to.
The state is trying to suppress the vote, man. Don't you know that?
Journalist Greg Palast obtained a list of more than 500,000 people whose eligibility is in question due to Crosscheck. He found one of them in this apartment building, said to be housing up to 10 double voters.
Here, Joseph Edward Naylor. That's you, right? And also, it says Louisiana Joseph Edward Naylor. You're suspected of voting twice, which is a crime. Is that true?
No, I didn't vote twice. I only voted here that year.
You know that this...
Matter of fact, in Louisiana, when I registered, I never voted. I just registered.
You registered, but you never voted in Louisiana.
Never did.
Right? But that was how many years ago?
Oh, man, since about 92, 93, something like that.
So we're talking 20 years ago? And they have you down for voting?
Twice. I didn't. I thought it was all straightened out.
Joseph Naylor, like most people on the Crosscheck list in Georgia, received a postcard from the county registrar asking him to verify his address. He says he sent it back, but he's still not sure how, or even if his name will appear on the voters list.
Are you going to vote in this election?
Yeah, they don't think about the list, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So if I don't want to vote, then they're going to try to get me some jail time. I want to know ahead of time before I vote.
So you're concerned that you could be arrested?
My livelihood is more important than any politician. Cause I want to live too. So why am I going to go to jail because somebody else going to see? If it caused me to go to jail, take me off the list. I don't care. Cause I don't want to go to jail.
And so do you think that this is then a tactic to scare people away from voting?
Could be. Me ain't scared by the voting. It's scaring me by going to jail. I don't want to go to jail or something stupid like that.
While Crosscheck could discourage some from voting, its supporters say it's a necessary tool.
Having requirements for people to vote can deter bad activities.
Jack Winters is the former head of the Republican Party in Fulton County, Georgia.
In this state, you're required to have voter ID to show up and vote. Do you think that there's a lot of fraud that requires that?
Some reports in the press would indicate there have been some fraudulent registration forms turned in, but I think the legal process is the right way to determine the answer to that, and it is underway right now.
Palast and his team did a statistical analysis on more than 2 million names on the Crosscheck list. Their projections found names like Jackson, Washington, Garcia, and Kim are overrepresented. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 53% of all Jacksons and 90% of Washingtons are African American. 91% of all Garcias are Hispanic, and 94% of all Kims are Asian.
I mean, if you know an Asian person, you probably know 2 people with the same name. So I would say that using that as a marker for fraudulent activity, that's very troublesome. I could see how that would systematically pull out certain ethnic groups, especially Asian ethnic groups. So
Helen Ho and Sang Park are members of a nonprofit providing legal aid for Asian Americans in Georgia.
In a lot of our ethnic communities, Korea is a good example, Vietnam, there's only a certain number of last names. Then when we all immigrate to America, we tend to spell our last names, even if there might be an actual difference in language in our home countries, we'll homogenize it. So we'll all be Kims, K-I-Ms, right? Or with the Vietnamese, we'll all be Nguyen's.
How does the Asian community vote Democratic, Republican?
Nationally, South Asians and Korean Americans tend to vote Democrat. But about 30% of Asian Americans don't align with any party, and I think that's why both parties tend to see our community as up for grabs. However, in 2012, the majority of Asians did vote for President Obama.
So this could be a threat to Asian American voters if they're tagged just because they have a common name. Here's Park. Oh, here's Park.
Yeah.
Lots of Park, Park. Oh, there you are, sir.
Sang Park.
Sorry. According to the state of Georgia, someone with you or someone like you voted Sang Park, voted in Suwanee, Georgia, and Annandale, Virginia.
Mr. Park Swanee is Hareo? He lives in Lenox, he says.
So, okay, so someone else with your name could lose their vote.
No, same name.
Yeah.
It's a
Where?
birthday different. It's a social security number different. Everything different. How to is a name is a same name is a lot of same names. 이해관계 없는데 누구지라 가서 한
says no one in their right mind will go out there and vote twice just to waste their time.
아니 한 번도 안 하려고 그러는데
Yeah, well, it says they won't even vote once. It is ridiculous that they would go out and vote twice.
Across town at Martin Luther King's old church in Atlanta, race and politics mix with the gospel.
We know that we are at war. We are at a real struggle to maintain, to make sure no one mitigates or undermines our basic right to vote.
Reverend Raphael Warnock has been at the center of an effort to get more African Americans to the polls. But he says claims of fraud tend to target black voters.
I mean, think about it. It's high risk and almost no reward. I mean, the risk for engaging in voter fraud is criminal prosecution. What's the reward? What does it take? How many imaginary voters or double voters do you have to create in order to actually sway an election? So the rewards are zero, and the risks are very high. And so this whole idea is fantastical.
Here we are in what used to be Reverend King's congregation. We're the Long March to voting rights for African Americans began.
Sure.
Now, half a century later, are you marching backwards? Is there a new attempt at voter suppression in this state?
There clearly is an effort to suppress the votes of African Americans and young people, elderly people. Clearly there is a kind of partisan cherry picking that's going on. But as the pastor of this church, I'm reminded that Martin Luther King Sr., Dr. King's father, led a voting rights campaign in Atlanta in 1935, 30 years before the voting rights law. And so that's the nature of the democratic process. It's a process. It's not a final product. And unfortunately, there are times when we think we've won certain battles and we find ourselves fighting those battles all over again, and it's our job to stand up.
That was Reverend Raphael Warnock of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, speaking to investigative journalist Greg Palast. He reported and produced the piece with the Oscar-nominated filmmaker Richard Rowley. Their reporting first aired on Al Jazeera America. The piece was narrated by Al Jazeera America's Joey Chen. After break, Greg Palast joins us live here in studio.
Voting representation, we want 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 voting representation, 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 voting representation.
Chant by Sweet Honey in the Rock. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're joined now by Greg Palast Live, who produced the Jim Crow Returns piece for Al Jazeera America, Puffin Foundation Fellow, author of the New York Times bestseller, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, How to Steal an Election in 9 Easy Steps. Greg, welcome back to Democracy Now!
Glad to be with you, Amy.
So talk about how you learned about and got a hold of these lists from the, what is the Interstate Voter Registration Crosscheck program.
Well, I had read that the state of Kansas and 27 other states had matched their voter files, and they found supposedly 6.9 million people, actually 3.5 million people, voting twice. Now, voting twice is a go-to-jail crime. You get 5 years in the federal penitentiary. And here were 3.5 million people supposedly committing this extraordinarily difficult voting in 2 states in the same election. They had their names, they had their addresses. So I said, I need the list. And I went through 6 months of hell because all these states, like North Carolina, said, well, these are criminals. We can't give you the list because they're suspects. I said, you've got 3 million suspects? So finally, I got 3 states relented after 6 months, and I got 2 million names, supposedly 1 million double voters. And this is a very, very typical list. For example, Robert Stephen Jackson Jr., or Robert Stephen Jackson, is supposed to be the same person as Robert Herman Jackson Jr., and 1 voting in Virginia, 1 voting in Georgia. Now, you have to understand, that's not unusual. If you look at my whole list, in fact, I think it was up on the screen there, there isn't a single name where the middle name matches on that list. In fact, we went through the entire 2 million names. 1 out of 4 names has a mismatch of just the middle name. Junior, senior, you know, junior, senior used to be father, son. Well, they say, no, it's the same voter, just, you know, taking a different shape and a different age. They claimed that that they used birth dates to match. There were no birth dates, none. They claimed that there was a Social Security match. This is Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State of Kansas. He's kind of the Catherine Harris of 2014. He's always finding illegal voters. But there are no Social Security matches, and they said if there's a mismatch of Social Security number, that's basically everyone on the list. It actually says in the instructions, which we found, that that they ignore the mismatch. They ignore the middle name mismatches, Social Security number mismatches, birth date mismatches. 500,000 people in Georgia alone are supposedly actual double voters, not double registered, double voters.
Last week, Democracy Now! Called the Kansas Secretary of State's office for details on which states participated in its voter registration data crosscheck program in 2014. Brad Bryant, the state election director, responded with a list and map. The states are Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Georgia, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, Nebraska, Nevada, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Virginia, Washington, and West Virginia.
Well, one correction there. Washington dropped out. That's how I got the list. Washington said, this list is junk. It's just a bunch of common names. The only match is first name and last name. So they handed me the list. They said, these aren't criminals. It's just a list of common American names. And, you know, as soon as you get to common names, Amy, you're getting to African Americans. That's a legacy of slavery. Most Jacksons in America, according to the U.S. Census, are African American. Most David Lees. We have a whole list. Oh, my God. We have pages and pages of Michael Lees. And most of those, about 64%, are Asian American. Like Michael L. Lee is supposed to be the same voter. He's from Georgia. Is supposed to be the same voter as Michael Thomas Lee of Virginia.
So they get around fast from one state to another, the same person is
we have
voting.
People, some of their names, they have people matched as voting 9 times.
How do you challenge this? I mean, the polls, well, a lot of people have been doing early voting, as we see. But tomorrow, if someone goes to the polls?
Unfortunately, it's a very underhanded method of removing people. When years ago I found the purge of black voters as so-called felons in Florida by Catherine Harris. There they marked an F next to someone's name if they were so-called felon. By the way, of 58,000 names, none were. None. And that changed the election of 2000. In this case, they don't mark anyone as a duplicate voter. Instead, they send you a postcard that says, please verify your address and name. Now, most people, looks like junk mail, throw it away. Renters, poor people, students who are moving a lot, the letter doesn't even find them. So they know who they're knocking off. If the letter doesn't come back in a state like North Carolina, they're going to remove that voter. In some states, it's a two-step process. If they don't vote Tuesday, they're marked inactive. If they don't vote Tuesday, then they will lose their vote for the presidential election, and that's where you're going to see the biggest effect of this. Wow. It could determine the Senate on Tuesday, but it will absolutely have a huge impact on the federal presidential in 2016.
And what would happen if you lost your right to vote if you don't vote tomorrow?
You know what they do? They give you one of these provisional ballots. The problem of a provisional ballot, it's like a placebo ballot. It makes you feel good. You filled out a ballot. They say, oh, we'll check your registration. If you're not registered, you're not registered. And they throw it out. That's the problem with getting the provisional ballot.
You're headed after the show to North Carolina. It's one of the states. I mean, we're talking about the majority of states are in this crosscheck program.
Majority, well, it's not just any states. Almost every state is a Republican-controlled state where the election board is Republican-controlled. So it's a very select group, about half the states, but it's the Republican states. And because they know who this is knocking off. They know who's losing their vote.
So what are you doing in North Carolina?
Well, I'm going to be looking at, well, we went down to meet, and we're going to try again, to meet with the FBI agent that the state of North Carolina has hired, a famous G-man named Chuck Stuber. He's now had their names. He's had 190,000 suspects of double voting in North Carolina for 6 months. He's got their names and addresses, but he still hasn't arrested anyone. So far, with all these millions of suspects, with their names, addresses, so you know they got all this information. They know where everyone is, and they show up to vote. They haven't arrested anyone because, in fact, there are no double voters. The fraud is not there. You don't have massive fraud by voters. You have massive fraud by the voting officials. So this G-man this FBI agent has arrested no one at all, not made a single referral, because he's not going to put his name behind arresting, you know, Larry Lee, because he's supposed to also be Michael Chang Lee. They're not going to do it.
I also wanted to ask you about Texas.
Yes.
Last month, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg issued a 6-page dissent criticizing the court's decision to allow Texas to use its new voter ID law in the midterm elections. She wrote, quote, "The greatest threat to public confidence in elections in this case is the prospect of enforcing a purposefully discriminatory law, one that likely imposes an unconstitutional poll tax and risks denying the right to vote to hundreds of thousands of eligible voters." The Supreme Court didn't rule on whether this was constitutional, the actual law. They said it would just cause confusion, and so they'd let it go for this time. Then they would look at it.
Well, the biggest single problem, again, is voter fraud is a fraudulent concept. For example, in North Carolina, where I'm going later today, they've imposed new ID requirements, as they have in Georgia, as they have in Texas. They haven't shown me a single case yet where someone has used someone else's identity to vote. I mean, identity theft in voting doesn't happen. You go to jail for 5 years. It's not a joke, and it's very easy to get caught. People don't do it. In other words, what they're doing is they're taking action against a crime that does not exist.
We have 10 seconds. What should people do when they go to the polls if they're told they can't vote?
Get your 800 number for voter protection, and whatever you do, don't simply accept a provisional ballot, because they're not going to count it.
Well, Greg Palast, I want to thank you for being with us. Investigative reporter. His piece appeared at Al Jazeera America. He's a Puffin Foundation fellow, author of the New York Times bestseller Billionaires and Ballot Bandits: How to Steal an Election in 9 Easy Steps.